on something you said?
Directly, and then I'll go to you, Laura. Go ahead.
Well, I think what you said is really important. I mean, we're gesturing toward that, but I think, because my husband's African American, and he went to an HBC as an undergraduate, right? We don't. I always tell him we didn't have that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's almost like, there were some, Chicano, Mexican American intellectuals and all that, but we don't have a kind of HBCs all over. I mean, there's a reason historically why they have that, but I think we're kind of like the equivalent of the HBC right now. You know what I mean? It's like a floating HBCs, and then the Chicano and Chicana Studies departments and LALS, those are kind of the equivalent of that. But I do think that, it's important that we're coming together, but it's important to recognize that that's kind of like the legacy and what you're talking about, like a reproduction of our intellectual formations. In subsequent generations, I mean, we're kind of doing that now, and we haven't had the benefit of 100 years of intellectuals in their own colleges due to Jim Crow laws, but at the same time they did have that's a beautiful formation, and it continues to this day. I mean, in terms of like forming the intellectuals, we have a vice president who went to an HBC. You know what I mean? So I think that that's an important point.
Let me go to Laura and then over to Pat.
I'm sorry.
No,
I interrupted.
no,
interrupted.
Right, so saludos everyone. I'm guessing because no one's wearing a mask and because we have people talking about public health that we're all good, not wearing masks. We're good.
We're boosted.
I can breathe too. So I'm sorry I missed everyone in the morning. I was in a class. But anyway, I just trying to catch the tail end of what you're saying. Here at UC Berkeley, in fact, David was so important and others to forming something that it took forever to form here, which was a Chicanx Latinx Faculty Association. And when we were finally able to do that, we were finally able to get this whole house and not just a few rooms. And it feels like, in terms of where are we now and what are the opportunities in front of us, at least here at UC Berkeley, we are finally at this stage of being able to struggle for HSI status. And of course, it's the Chicanx Latinx faculty who are leading that, right, in its various stages, and who pushed for it. I really appreciate that we take like an attitude of like positivity, like, right, what has been done, what have we accomplished, what power do we have, what have we manifested, and therefore kind of thinking what power do we have for what remains to be done, right? So in that vein, I think I also want to share that on campus anyway, and it might be a reflection elsewhere, I think that we have a challenge to try to break the kind of white liberal mentality that still mainly sees things in terms of black and white issues. And so I want to frame this in a really positive way because I think there's a lot of goodwill right now. But I think that because a lot of the white administrators haven't studied any of this, they haven't lived it, they haven't experienced it, that they have real trouble when they think about diversity on campus and equity. They think about it really as like, what can we give whatever community is asking us at the moment? And they do that kind of quietly instead of like as like an open program for everyone to participate. So I think that the Latinx community, students, staff, faculty, find that really discouraging, that it feels like that we're the majority in the state, we're going to be the majority on the campus. It's such a progressive community, we support all the other movements, and yet it always feels like we have to struggle really, really hard to obtain what other communities get through like solo negotiation or something like this. So how do we move forward in a way that is like honors like our multicultural, right, intent, which has always been part of what we do, so that we don't fall into this divide and conquer. Yes. But at the same time, I think we have a lot of educating to do about Chicanx, Latinx, and especially the point that the compañero made earlier. Many of us are here at this table, but the majority of our community is still not. It's kind of surprising to see how much the pipeline is, how precarious it actually is.
No, that's really important, and that also helps come back to what you were raising about how in the study of ourselves do we also increase our visibility, because that's what we did with our studies. We made ourselves more visible, but yet somehow we're still invisible to so many groups, right, and people. So that would be a good way to bring that back in. But let me go to you, Pat, because you've been patiently.
So I think it's been really generative to talk about building this infrastructure and celebrating the accomplishments that we've achieved through a lot of hard work. But one of the things I'd like to pose as a question is a conversation we had last night with Ines and Yvette about how do we intervene with those colleagues who are feminists, who took ethnic studies, who are coming to Latinx, Chicano studies programs, and yet don't have the experience that we had with the Chicano movement, weren't part of this movement to build academia, and so are very much about their careers, about their opportunities, about getting the resources, and in fact have the temerity to blow off some of our elders.
Yes.
Like, what do you do when you have an aging set of intellectuals who are not going to be there to keep these mentoring processes going, et cetera? Like, what do we do with these neoliberal Latinxes?
Yes.
That's a
Good question.
yeah, that's a really
great
great question. I want to make sure that we come back to that question.
I'd like to.
I want to make sure we come back to that question tomorrow. I also want to make sure, there's some things I want to bring in about public health, so I'm going to sort of privilege myself for a minute, then I'm going to go to Angela and Amelia. Because we haven't really covered this yet. We kind of alluded to it a little bit, but I want to make sure that we talk about environmental racism. This is something that I've been involved in, for not racism, but the environmental justice movement since the early 90s, and even in my role now as a as chair of the Chicago Plan Commission, I'm able to sort of sneak it in different kinds of ways. But I think, you talked about the cancer clusters in these industrial areas, right? And what is still, this has gone on now for hundreds of years, but it's still going on, which is this concentration of the most toxic kinds of industrial activity being located in our neighborhoods, right? And so this is definitely a big issue in Chicago, Southwest Side, South. In fact, you made reference to the article that my son is quoted in. He actually even helped sort of direct the shaping of that piece around the Amazon and the location of all these logistics facilities. Where is it? And the amount of truck traffic and diesel fumes that's causing, and where are they all being located? Right, they're being located in our neighborhoods, in our communities. And what's a couple of things are interesting. One is that the data is there showing that in fact there are higher rates of asthma, there are higher rates of other kinds of respiratory diseases, there are higher rates of cancer, and yet they still want to place those there. And so in these locations, there's a lot of struggle going on right now around that. But what's interesting is they do it in the name of jobs, right? Which is a quote that he's quoted on, right? In the name of economic activity, right? They're poisoning our communities. And so I think that poisoning of communities is something that's very current. One of the points that I've made sitting on the Plan Commission has been to point out that this concentration, and that we need to stop sort of juxtaposing the sort of jobs versus our community, because it's like that's somehow supposed to be the argument. Well, let's accept the jobs then, right? Because it's okay if we have the employment because we need the jobs, but never mind that we're getting all this contamination. So I just wanted to introduce that into the context around jobs, pressures on employment, emerging focus of the economy. The TDLs is really is going to become more and more important in everybody's economy. And one of the things that I hear my son talk a lot about, and some of the folks in his circles, is this idea that part of why we're even having such a big growth of all this transportation, distribution, and logistics is because we produce everything somewhere else.
Yeah.
We saw that during the pandemic. We don't have our own manufacturing sector. And if we were producing more things locally, if we had more local economies, more local regenerative economies, right, where we have sort of where there's a smaller scale local economic activity, that helps reduce even the need for all these sort of expansive movement of goods and so on. But the point is that our communities are paying the price for the kind of economic activity that exists. So whatever the economic activity is that's being put forward as the economic activity today, we bear the negative impacts of it, right? And so I wanted to, and I think even my perspective that I bring to all this stems from all this work that we've done over the years, right? And my interface even with environmental justice movement activists who are engaged in this work. So, but it's tied to public health issues as well, and we rely on public health people for some of that data. Although a lot of these folks are collecting their own data as well.
Just put me in line with everything.
Yeah, so we're going to probably shift gears on topics. You can come back to this one, or you want to just say something about this topic?
Say this.
Go ahead on this topic,
Sure.
and then I think we're going to shift topics.
Yeah. You know, in public health, it's a tough nut to crack. And just from my own experience, when I got involved in this cancer prevention research, there's not a whole lot of Latinos, Hispanics, Chicanos doing that kind of research. Although Eliseo Perez Stable was part of that group, Lalo, that got together and did some work under the National Cancer Institute funding. That's how I met Eliseo. But in doing all that work, the governor appointed me to the Colorado Board of Public Health in 94, 95, something like that, because I was visible. But you know, it gave me another opportunity to look at, now, you've got oil and gas, and these are the people that are having their rigs 1,000 feet from neighborhoods, right? I mean, right now we're fighting back to putting them a half mile back. And there's just a big fight. You don't even, how can you just do a half mile? They need to be back further, you know? And so one of the things that I also learned in the late 90s was that, and we should talk more about lessons learned, is that we just lost the school board direction that was starting to become more egalitarian. And our Chicano community spent a year writing a white paper, submitted it to the school board. They read it and dumped it. Did they ask people to come to testify? No. Our community was beat and pissed off. And I didn't participate in that because I said, Rene Galindo, you're our education person, you go do that, right? And he did it. And he came back and he said, you know, here we got beat. And so what did we do? I said, well, shoot, we're losing the school board because we don't have members on the school board. And so the next thing we did, I said, let's just get, how many votes do we need? 4. Okay, we're gonna run 3 people next time. And I jumped into the education fray, and we elected 2, and we almost got a 3rd. But that changed the board's complexion. It changed the direction. We took control. And so a lot of times, and I come back to the public health thing, you know, I'm thinking, okay, I've got to jump back to public health, because when I was on that board, who was sitting across from me was the Ball Corporation representative. There were 9 of us. And what are they fighting for? The kinds of stuff that we're opposing. And so they had, in that board, 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, and one other person who chaired it. So it was always going to be split. But those are the kinds of things that we need to think about in terms of how do you turn over those rules and regulations, because that's what governs those positions sometimes. It's not just the laws, it's just the regulatory agency and bureaucracy that kills us, literally.
Yeah, literally.
I think, you know, just maybe to try and combine all these thoughts together, I think we do have to look at the structure of policy making and how policy gets formed. We call it the Chorizo. But even before you get to the Chorizo, you know, you have to consider that a lot of what we're seeing in politics these days is really to keep us from doing this work. It's like, you know, bomb after bomb after bomb, you know, anti-abortion, critical race theory, and we have to fight them, right? And but what they're doing on one side of the house is distracting us from the real nastiness and real ugliness that they're doing on the other side of the house. And what do? We all get together and we all gather, and it becomes like this you know, this theater that plays out. Again, it's important theater. I call it the colonial matrix of power, right? But it deprives us of like defining our own future, our own epistemologies, our own values, because we're just so busy putting out fires, right? And so, I mean, I think we really have to look at what's happening, because I am interested in fighting the oil companies, but I'm not going to do it alone. I mean, I have a sense of survival in the academy. And I know where I am. I know I'm in Texas.
I was gonna say,
I know I'm in the shadow of the carbon, you know, the
big footprint.
yeah, the mafia, the
big
oil
footprint.
companies, and what they're doing is devastating to the environment, and so it really bothers me. I mean, we could use these neoliberal Chicanas, you know, to take on an issue like this, to join forces, to link arms. But what's keeping them, you know, or the Chicanos from doing this? These are our own friends and faculty, our own colegas that we know by name at our respective universities. And you're just wondering, you know, where are you? You know, where are they? I mean, Emilia and I show up to the State Board of Education and we look around and they're not there. And that's consequential, because what we know in education is that the reproduction of consciousness is through curriculum. How do we become? How have we become? How much have we mentioned curriculum today in terms of what formed us? That book that you shared, right? That you know, bringing in the Chicana feminist perspectives within our teachings, right? And so I really think education is so underestimated as a site for intervention when it comes to the reproduction of consciousness, because there's just, we need curriculum writers. That's how we got organized at Academia Cuautli. You know, there's not material in the schools, and we're supposed to be a dual language district offering, you know, like Spanish and English language instruction to kids throughout this whole district, and we don't have materials, and if we have them, they're sometimes off in terms of the language. Someone from Argentina translated these children's books. Even the palette is like not Southwestern, it's like from another place, right? And then they can't seem to imagine us differently in the Northeast, where they publish these books any differently than as immigrants, we're getting citizenship, right? Or making food. I mean, that's how they see us. Right now, Joaquin Castro, he's going to meet, and I'm in touch with his staff, like, next week. He wants to meet, and I shot him a quick email of stuff that he needs to do to crack this concern that he also has of how we're being represented in the arts, how we're being represented by the Northeast book publishers, how he's interested in our underrepresentation in theater, and then what he calls the hard news. And so Lulag, we've already met with him. I know he's interested, so I think we have to be more intentional about our representation, how we're being represented all the way through in all of these areas, but I would say, you know, beginning with the K-12 curriculum. So Chicana studies have been for me has been very important, because I think it's helped to illuminate the structured silences, you know, what is not getting taught, and what is the opportunity cost that comes with those structured silences, and how our invisibility gets engineered and our failure is organized. Schools are actually successful because they're not supposed to be reproducing people like us, right? And I think that we should pat ourselves on the back, frankly, for the attack right now against us under the guise of critical race theory, because they're just realizing, I actually read some right-wing stuff recently, and it's like, well, we were all focused on the vote. Gosh, you know, little did we know that there were all of these other people that were writing about like curriculum and the stuff that they want to put in the schools. They're talking about us, okay? And we're also getting the notice of the post-colonial scholars, you know, the post-colonial who are looking at those of us that are challenging this colonial matrix through decolonial frameworks, right? Through Chicana feminist frameworks, but also through enunciating new realities. So as we fight the colonial matrix of policy, I think we're at our best when we're also envisioning and creating and institutionalizing a new reality, right? I think we're there. I feel that we're there, where we can actually like be the authors of a new narrative of the human experience.
Pat, you asked a very important question as far as I'm concerned. You know, what are we to do here in this room, the folks we represent? I think that is a critical question. The reason I say that is because I believe, especially after I interviewed Martina, that we have a truncated history as far as the history of social movements. Mm-hmm. It's almost like T.S. Eliot once said about the literary history, we restart this consciousness and act on it because we forget or don't have an opportunity to learn about what happened before us. Mm-hmm. And in history, that is really obvious to me. Our social movement, the history of social movement is very truncated. And I fear that the generation that follows us is going to be so estranged from us that they will not continue many of his ideas, or even if they oppose them. You know, they're not going to take things forward as we would want them to. But then Aida says something really important too, and that is that we're a very privileged group. We're living longer. We have a history. We have not only a responsibility, but we have an obligation to reach out to the younger people.
I just wanted to go back to the seventh point on the school board and the curriculum. All the years I was running my mentor program, K through 12, the college students were journaling, and so I read all their journals, so I kind of knew all the issues that these Mexican farm worker kids were facing in school. And I got elected to the school board. And they affirm all the books, the curriculum, and the pedagogy. So it's actually a place where there's sort of democracy still, because you've got 5 people, you have 3 of you, and you make deals, right?
Sure.
Get something to pass, it becomes institutionalized. Mm-hmm. So that's an institution, I think, that's real important for us or our students to, because everybody comes from a community with a school board, to get on those boards. Mm-hmm. That's one board that actually can change schools.
Yes,
absolutely.
Yes.
All right, Rosalinda, and then followed by Francisco.
Yeah, I might have lost my train of thought, but I wrote some notes. Yeah, I mean, I think, going back on what you were saying, I think that one of the things that we need to remember is that we also, participate in social movements. I think when we talk sort of like just at the academy level, and thinking about like the epistemologies and what it is that we have kind of built and what it is that we build at the curricular level and all that. I mean, those are like really important points, but in order to create like social change, we do need to be a part of a social movement. And I mean, I think that that's what's happening now. You're seeing not, when you talk about intersectionality, it's not really about identities anymore, it's about struggles, how it is that our struggles are intersect with not only other communities, but other, formations, the ecological notions, movements that are going on in different parts of the world, in Palestine, in Mexico, in different parts of Latin America, indigenous struggles. I think that's the moment we're waiting for. But we're like building all this sort of like knowledge now for that moment. And I think that the generations, our neoliberal colleagues, that you referenced to, I think we need to be there to guide them into that moment, because that moment's going to happen. I mean, there is already a reaction to fascism and authoritarianism all over the world. And I think, we just...
And global warming.
And global warming, and I think we just have to kind of be ready and be a part of that.
As we always have.
I agree, but I think that we do need a social movement of people, and it's not just people in the academy. It's like work people in unions, sindicatos, all that's what's going on right now. I think that's. I just want us to remember that Chicano and Chicana studies. I mean, it comes out of a social movement. It wasn't something that came up top down, it was bottom up. And I think we're in that moment now where the bottom up is coming again. We're at the top right now. We are in elite institutions. I mean, I'm not anymore. I'm like Tomas, out in have, indulging myself, but I think, not really. No, but what I'm saying is that we're, it's like, we kind of have to make that kind of, that connection, that's not just about the academy.
Can I make a
Please,
quick
sir, go ahead.
clarification?
Yeah.
I totally agree that we need to mentor, that our history
And
is
you've always done
truncated.
it. And you've always
And
done it.
we've all always done
Yes.
it. What I'm talking about is people who are in the house, people in Latinx studies or Chicana studies,
Yep.
our students, our assistant professors who care more about their careers than they do about our students.
right.
Like, how do we create that
Yes.
political consciousness that we got out of social movements? Like, to me, that seems to be an
I
important
think they'll
project.
get it out of social movement, that's what I'm saying. I'm hoping.
Well,
But
no,
they
I think, can I just, 'cause I don't think, we have not yet addressed your question. Just like we haven't finished addressing
Fully.
your question. And I'd like us to come back, if not today, because we've still got a lot of it. But I think maybe tomorrow, if we can maybe, or someplace, or maybe even in our conversations. Because you've really, this phrase you just said, in the house, right? And it's not so easy as just to say, let's bring them along, whatever, because what you described, and maybe I have privilege because I listened to you talk about it last night, what you have described is very serious, right? And it's a serious sort of move against everything that we have ever done or been, right? And it's active opposition to everything we've done or we have been. And so it's not an easy one. It's more complex than just a momentary back and forth. So and then this whole issue.
but we
no,
have-
hold on. And then this issue of visibility is something that I think we're also going to want to have as an ongoing conversation for us, right? Because I think we all, despite everything we've done, everything we are, despite our numbers, it's still, race is still constructed black and white. We're still left out of conversation with there. So these are two conversations that I think I want to make sure that we're not going to do now, but we're going to keep going, because there's more to be said about both of those. But because I've got a list of that's still several people long, let me go to Francisco next, and then I'm going to go to Tisa.
That's Pancho, because Francisco.
Oh, that's right, you're Pancho,
I'm Pancho today. Yes, ma'am. And, I was talking about that piece that I wrote on how values are being upended. And I think that is something that we have to recognize. I mean, you're just illustrating it by telling us, sharing what you're sharing, that, well, let me go back. I think, Emilio, when you said truncated history, I actually would propose that that's the way history is. History is truncated. We assume a continuity that's only in our minds. It's not really there. I mean, Chicanos, Jose Limon wrote about, the Congress of 1911. Chicanos thought that we invented the movimiento when the movimiento had been going on for decades and centuries before. So we have to be aware of our own quixotic delusions about, I mean, the ideas that we have about what human values are being upended. People are saying, this professional, forward-looking, in-house Latinos, Latinx that you're talking about, those are their values. It's not that they don't see it. And the question of how do you change their consciousness? Oh my God, like really, can we actually change their consciousness? Because I think that the struggle for human dignity continues, but it gets reinvented every generation depending on the discourse available to every generation. And the way, cada cabeza es un mundo, so everybody redefines, when I talk to my children, the way they redefine the struggle drives me crazy because I don't think they get it. But of course I got my own biases because, they were not in the movimiento because they were not even born yet. So just the way that I don't understand, the latest computer technology, they don't understand what I'm talking about when we're talking about the movimiento. And then just in terms of what you were talking about, the school board, the Justice Democrats, anybody knows about them?
Yes.
The Justice Democrats have actually taken that on. They're the ones who got Ocasio elected. And what they decided is that instead of going to the legislators and saying, pass this, pass that, and they don't do it, you say, if you don't pass this, we're gonna vote you out of office and vote some.
They have
So,
targets.
but anyway, that's my point.
And then, and then Laura, and then over to Felipe.
So I was thinking way back in the beginning of our conversation when Lalo talked about connecting with younger people. And then the hip hop car went by, and I was remembering last night somebody commenting about how our youth think they're black because they use the same kind of language, you know. And all of those things put together, I think that we, as Chicano scholars and of the generation we are, you know, we are looking for the same in the young people, and they're different. They're of a different generation, and they're mixed race, and that language that they're using is not black language; it's their language.
Yeah.
You know, and like a scholar like Adriana Clay, who writes about hip hop, she writes about hip hop in a very revealing way that is not only about black youth, but it's about the generation gap and the assertion of culture, you know, that belongs to the youth, and it's mixed race. So when we as Chicano scholars look for the connections we need to make with younger people, we got to open our minds to what we're looking for, you know, and read someone like Adriana Clay, because she really just opened my mind to the generational difference. You know, we have Chicanos following us that don't even use the word Chicano, but they are the next generation of the Chicano movement.
We here in this room and others that are like us, a lot depends on us because we do have a historic opportunity to extend this beyond us like we've never had before in our history. And if we don't do it, we will be failing not only ourselves, but the future generations. I think we need to reach out. We need to do more mentoring. We need to write more. We do. You know, I heard an older man once say, you know, I speak with the authority that my years give me. We ought not to be shy about who we are. We are who we are at this moment in history, and we have a responsibility. I'm not saying that this is going to resolve everything, but this is something we absolutely have to do.